Good afternoon. Hello there, followers of the Messiah and those seeking the truth. Welcome to another episode of Patriotism Today. Today we're going to talk about something a little different, something along the lines of what is your story? It occurred to me last night when I was half asleep and half in the sack, and everybody's got a story to tell and a journey. And it's important that you realize your journey, your story impacts other people in your life. There are those that are completely transparent and forthcoming. And then you've got many that are afraid of being honest and open. And as a result, they set out to cover their tracks and deceive. And maybe it's not intentional initially, but we do find over time many of them live that lifestyle, and it's unfortunate. So let's take a look at what this really means and what is your story. So let me tell you a little bit about me and how that all came about. And some of this has application as well to what's going on in the current events. But I'm not going to touch a lot on that today. So if you don't want to hear who this guy is, then we'll see you tomorrow. But if you'd like to hear a little bit of where I'm coming from, this might be helpful. So for the longest time, I've lived my life pursuing things in front of me and perhaps dreaming dreams big enough that others would sit back and watch to see how it all came about. My longtime Microsoft friend, Wayne, Wayne left us a couple of years ago. He died of cancer. He was a good friend of mine. And he was always heard saying, wow, how do you do those things? And the reality is I rarely shied away from a challenge in anything that I could learn from, whether it was riding cross country on a Harley, which I have done multiple times, and many other things, which I'll touch on a little later. For many years in the industry, though, and I'm in the tech industry, early in tech in the 80s, when most of us were getting involved, a lot of us were fake it till you make it. And I was one of those guys, spending countless hours reading, studying, experimenting until I could run circles around certain of my peers. We had various different outlets, and I was in Silicon Valley at the time. There was a place called Weird Stuff Warehouse, and you could literally get, for pennies on the dollar, software that was a couple versions out of date that you could take home, install on your own computers, and actually experiment and learn with. And that's how I learned Oracle. That's how I learned Informix. That's how I learned Unix, all these things. So a lot of us learned this way. It was very much a natural, innate curiosity with that ability to learn that got me into technology. I was a network engineer for starters. I also had a background in databases, and that launched and expanded my career in big tech. Over the years, I've had better situations where I could actually then afford to learn more skills, do things on my own, and then teach others. And I've never lost that innate curiosity, but also realized if you can help lift others up as you learn, they will indeed be part of your story of success. So I've always been that kind of guy. A couple of guys that I worked with over the years, I distinctly remember shortly after I left Microsoft. One was a fellow coach and another was a program manager at a bank who I won't name. Both had skills, and when I landed a dream job, I mean literally double what I had been earning, I reached out to each in their own time and brought them into the same engagements. The first has since retired early, being a frugal sort. He's out fishing, going to college football games, and just living the life. And that boost of a couple years doing what I was doing gave him what he needed to hit the off-ramp early and go enjoy the rest of his life. The other has since spun up his own consulting business, having left the doldrums of a program manager job at a large bank to an agile coach and ultimately a consultant under his own shingle. And I wish them both continued success and pleasure in what they do. Now, I don't say this to blow my own horn, but only to point out as you succeed, it gets lonelier to find those like minds that want to challenge and indeed want to take that risk of success. Remember, success doesn't come free, never does. You have to risk, and you can mitigate some of that risk, but indeed you have to risk to indeed get to that point of gain. Many want things handed to them. They don't want to take risks. And the reality is you can't have that. You have to be the caliber of individual in that success. And the only way you can get there is to grow and stretch your abilities as you go along. So if you're looking for coaching on success, I've got a lot of opinions, and I've actually got the results to point to. Never go to somebody who has not achieved what you want to achieve. And I learned that early on. I took coaching from a couple of millionaires that were in their early 40s. I also took, and they weren't in technology. I also took some coaching from some folks within technology that I aspired to be like. So over the years, though, I've paid my dues. On the website here, which I will link in the video description, there's a number of jobs I've held. And this is over 45 years, everything from bookkeeping in my early teen years all the way to what I do today. And there's a lot of things. And most of these are people stuff, but then there's some other things where you're left with your own mind and you get time to think. And I'll tell you, the thinking time is hard to come by the older you get. So if you get an opportunity to do that and you're able to pull in some money while you're doing it, take those thinking jobs. They're really good. So spiritually, success is very similar. Yeshua, if you're new to this, Yeshua is he who is most commonly called Jesus, but that name only came up in the 15th century. So I refer to him by as close to his given name as possible out of respect and reverence. So Yeshua stated that you will be given certain knowledge a bit at a time, and your obedience or lack thereof would determine if more was forthcoming. So our Father is patient with us. He won't dump the truckload of information or knowledge on you, but instead shows you, here's what you need to be obedient. And if you execute on that, he'll give you more, and on it goes. And you learn to become an obedient citizen of the kingdom. The antithesis of this is also true. If you choose to ignore or blatantly disobey, even what he gave will be removed, seared from your memory, and then more will slowly be removed. Read the first chapter of Romans. You're going to find that's exactly what happens. The disobedience leads to further disobedience, leads to further degradation, and ultimately your conscience is seared so that you don't even recognize what the truth is anymore. This is something most don't realize. Your obedience and faithfulness is what determines your role in the kingdom. Yeshua said that those that were faithful in little would be faithful in much. Keep this in mind. If you learn something that's contrary to what your church is teaching in the scripture, you need to decide, do I follow the doctrines of men, your church, or do I go with the word of my Father and get that confirmed from some other really good teachers of the instructions? No matter what you do, you have to you have that impact on others. As Yeshua said, by their fruit you will know them. And the reality is we need to be joined with him to be that peaceful kingdom citizen that helps and leads others. So hidden among us, we should always be aware there are those we have in our teams, whether it's a political team, whether it's a community team, whether it's followers of the Messiah. Even Judas was a follower, but always on the fence. His actions didn't initially give him away, but some of his words did. Remember, he complained that they used the perfume on the feet of the Messiah, and he said that if we sold the perfume, we could have fed people. And boy, that sounds really good, doesn't it? But he was skimming off the group treasury. His goal was more self-enrichment. He had no intent of making others fed, etc. His goal was perfect self-enrichment for himself. Now, something to keep in mind, also hidden amongst us, and this came out in the news last week and this week, so keep this in mind. Off our shores, we've had news of container-based missiles that China has been perfecting for more than a decade. You can go to Marfugel News. He's got some great reports on this over the last week. What if the reason for the delay in all those container deliveries is by design to stall out the Trojan horses that were set up and then ultimately expose them? So along with our much needed goods, was the hidden downfall of our country by those Trojan horse containers out there? It's food for thought. So give it some thought and realize there's a reason for everything, and that may indeed come out in the coming months. So things to be aware of, and this is one of my favorites. Be thankful that you're not where you used to be in life. You've outgrown so much and you're still learning. You've survived a lot and it made you a better person. Give yourself credit for making it this far. Some of your best days are ahead of you. Keep going and never give up. So I hope that's helpful. Let me give you a little background about me and how I got here prior to my life at Microsoft, so you kind of know who this guy is as we go forward over the coming days. So my life is actually pretty public. You can see my work history and my business patents as well as personal history in most search engines. I've removed the last few years as I do sensitive work that's affiliated with the government in some cases. So as to avoid conflicts or compromises, I've had to obfuscate that. For the most part, I grew up the oldest child of a family of 5, us 3 kids, where dad was a child of a Texas farm family of 13, and he was the 10th born. Mom was one of 2 kids to a broken home in the Pacific Northwest, both connected at Treasure Island in the San Francisco Bay, as dad was a stores keeper in the Navy and mom was a clerk on the base. We ended up growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area and didn't have much travel nor excitement other than the occasional house break-in. We vacationed in the cheaper places and even when possible our old grandpa's cabin. It's long since changed hands and gone, but I still have very fond memories, even though we were low on the income scale. If you've ever watched That 70s Show, I lived that in high school. I mean, everything they did in that show, we did. So I never visited Disneyland as a kid. It wasn't until I was 19, had some spending cash, that we road tripped as a group of teams in a motorhome to Disneyland, and that's when I began to see the outside world. Since then, I've traveled about 40 of the 50 states, most of the northern hemisphere in Europe, other than the Iron Curtain countries prior to the fall, and then spent time in India for business and personal business, as well as ridden cross-country here in the States on a Harley. And additionally, I've photographed and scuba dived dozens of dive sites on the West Coast, and that includes Mexico. It wasn't until my 40s I discovered the power of yes, and then just explored what you've never done. I count that awakening as wow. Wish I'd known better 10 to 15 years sooner, as it opened up a whole new area of achievement. I became a competitive bodybuilder when I was 41. I did that cross-country trip when I was 41. I've done several more since then, and that's actually when my career really exploded. So to this day, other than an oil millionaire on my dad's side of the family, I'm the successful kid they talk about. Far from a millionaire, having been married a few times, I've gained and lost more than I can count. But again, it's a learning experience. I have no angst about any of that. So having walked as an evangelical Christian for almost 37 years, I was exposed to the path that showed how out of obedience most churches were. And that to me was a huge eye-opener. Most churches don't teach obedience, but throughout the New Testament we read, if we love him, we will keep his commandments. Nobody ever questions what that means. But I liken that moment to the same as when the blind man suddenly got his sight back and the deaf man got his hearing back. 4 years ago that happened to me. I began that walk realizing, oh my word, look at this. It says if we do this, and then the commandments, based on Yeshua's own words, we're back in the first 5 books of the Bible. And it's like, this is easy. So 4 years ago, I began that walk and quickly connected the dots and walked as a first century follower of the Messiah. And it's very different from what we call Christians today. Now, I don't blame most Christians, as they have just listened to their churches, as I did. But we need to search the scriptures for ourselves, and quickly we see how out of sorts the church really is. The key difference being we know that Yeshua redeemed us, but we are rarely taught that our love for him shows in our obedience to his words, those instructions in the first 5 books of the Bible. So again, Yeshua bought us our redemption. We show our love in our obedience to what he reveals in his word for us. It's an evolving thing as well. Initially, I learned the feast in Leviticus 23, then the foods in Leviticus 11, and yeah, that's really true. And there's a number of good teachers like Zach on New to Torah and Lex out on Unlearn that explain the foods, and I can do that as well, but those guys already have videos on demand you can go check. And then it began getting quite a bit deeper. One of the benefits of years of scripture study is that I'd already memorized a lot of verses, pored over the Proverbs of Solomon, and those keep me on the path. And as he exposed things to you or to me, you'll either obey and get the lesson, or if you choose to ignore it, he'll take that knowledge from you. Remember, he's patient, but as he said, I'll not always strive with you. There will come a time. So for those professing to follow the Messiah of the Bible, do be aware. We can see your fruit or lack thereof. Don't be deceived, because we know. As it inspires me, I'll share more of that journey. It's important that more and more people return to the first century walk prior to it being corrupted. So I wish you all peace. We'll talk more about the news at the close of tomorrow. I anticipate there's going to be a few things. We heard that the court trial for the Maxwell trial was cut short today based on an illness. So let's see what unfolds tomorrow morning. So I wish you all peace, and may the blessings of the Lord be upon you.